Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Narativ. I'm Zev Shalev. In the 8 years I've been doing Narativ, we've only covered Canada once. That was during the convoy protests that paralyzed Ottawa and blocked the US-Canadian border. Our focus has primarily been on threats to democracy in the United States. But today, that changes. We're launching Narativ Canada, because growing evidence suggests that Canada is facing very similar challenges to those the United States encountered in 2016, 2020, and now in 2024. Recent Department of Justice indictments and reputable analysis points to a concerning picture of democracy under attack north of the 49th parallel. Now, during the Trump administration, we got used to senior advisor Jared Kushner operating without a proper security clearance. But now a very similar situation is unfolding in Canada, not within the administration of Justin Trudeau, but with the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre. For those of you not keeping up with Canadian politics that closely, here's a brief summary of where we are. Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party has lost its partnership with the left-leaning New Democratic Party, the NDP. That's jeopardizing the Liberal Party's minority government. Meanwhile, Poilievre's Conservatives lead in most public opinion polls. So it's curious then that the man who could be prime minister, according to all these polls, is refusing top secret security clearance checks. That's like one of the party leaders in the Gang of Eight refusing to have classified briefings. It's just unheard of. The strange case of Pierre Poilievre's top secret clearance is the main story on the premiere edition of Narativ Canada with a very special guest. It has been a long time coming for us on Narativ. It is time finally to do Narativ Canada. How'd you like that graphic? Yeah. And my guest tonight is a Canadian legend, Dean Blundell. To many people who have ever listened to radio in Canada or Toronto, you would know that Dean Blundell is just a legend. He used to host the 108 morning show here, but has touched many lives in many different ways in your trajectory in Canada, Dean. And you're going to help me unscramble the soup that is Canada's political scene right now.
Yeah, but the Canada's political scene, very much like America's political scene, only a little more muted. It's like Maple MAGA are the MAGA eunuchs in this country.
There is actually an attempt here to create a sort of a mini MAGA movement out of the Conservative Party of Canada, which is ludicrous when you think about it, because Canada is a quiet, peaceful, delightful little place. Nothing happens in Canada until the new Conservative leader arrived and his deputy. So tell me a little bit about why there is so much concern around the leader of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And likewise, appreciate being on your show. Narrative is one of my podcasts. I've got about 5 or 6 that are in rotation and love what you do. Watch your entire show, Unmasking the Leaks last night with Elon. And that's going to eat a little springboard because we have the exact same problem America has. We just don't hear about it because we've got 5 news outlets and they're all compromised like all the other news outlets.
They sure are, yeah.
And it's been an interesting 5 years. I think I can trace the infusion of MAGA into the Maple MAGA movement in Canada probably about 5-6 years ago. You saw Donald Trump rise to power. And I think the powers that be in this country took note, right? I think that when you look at the conservative movement and just to extrapolate what the conservative movement, it is no longer that conservative movement. GOP is no longer the GOP. That is a party with policies that are so out of date, that are wrapped up in religious dogma, wrapped up in extremism, that they legitimately had to target the same people MAGA targeted in the United States. And when you watch Donald Trump's rise to power, there was a radicalizing strategy that they use to try to make sense to a certain denomination of individual. And those denominations of individual are across the spectrum. Starts with the cognitively delayed or the stupid, as I like to point out. And it goes all the way through religious extremism, evangelicism, Abrahamic faiths, churches, lobby groups. And you saw really the consolidation of a bunch of people who literally walk around and pretend that they're victims. I call them the victim class. And the conservative movement in Canada really saw what was going on in the United States. They saw Donald Trump rise to power. They saw the way that they radicalized people with misinformation, disinformation, cute memes that dumb people can understand. And they attached that movement to the core beliefs of a group of people who they would never help to begin with. Marx, if you will. Yeah. And when Pierre Poilievre saw that, the conservative movement up here saw that, and they saw Donald Trump rise to power, and they saw him win when he wasn't supposed to win. And if you know anything about the history of conservatism, it's dead. It's dead because it lives in these archaic ideologies. And so they thought, okay, that's what we have to do. We have to start absolutely flooding the zone with bullshit. We need to start sending people data attribution, donation certificates, and we need to do it with content that makes people mad. We need to attach that messaging to core beliefs of a certain segment of people. And Ezra Levant from Rebel News described it to one of his employees who we had on the podcast today. His name's Kalen Robertson, who just aired it out, how Russia works with Rebel News.
I got a story about Rebel News, but that's for another day. But
oh, no, I'm going to have you on my podcast. Yeah. As long as you can provide receipts like this gentleman does.
I've got the receipts. I've got the lawsuit that they sent me, so I'll bring that along.
Oh my God. I feel like we should stop down and start there. But to that point, the MAGA movement has been able to imbue themselves to a group of people who are marginalized, who are angry that their lives suck to no fault of anybody else but themselves. And they've effectively pointed the finger at the same thing MAGA pointed the finger at, which is the woke indoctrination or woke mind virus, the LGBTQ community, continually repeating Canada is broken and really appealing to the sense of people and people who thought that they were being marginalized because their lives sucked, because they couldn't get an education, or maybe their parents were bad people and they had a tough time and they hate the government, they hate authority. The victim class.
It's a really dumb idea. It go after the worst people in the world and try to put them into a group together.
Yeah.
But people you'd loathe to be at a dinner party with, and the people you'd most really not want to spend any time with, and you're going to put them all together to be victims in one party, and then you're going to hope for success. It's impossible for that to succeed. And yet here we are, and they're trying the same formula in Canada that they've tried in the United States. So along comes, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit here because we should. The Department of Justice comes along and drops this indictment. And in this indictment, they mentioned 2 Russian Today employees, Ilyana there and Kostya. They're long time, maybe not so long time employees of RT, which turns out to be a fully owned subsidiary of the Russian intelligence services. And they have funded something called Tenet Media for $10 million a year. And Tenet Media is also basically a subsidiary of RT / the Russian intelligence movement, only it's partially owned in Canada by some woman in Canada.
Yeah, Lauren Chen is her name. Canada doesn't have RICO laws, Ev. We don't have the same laws. We don't have the same banking laws. We're safe to some extent and unsafe to the other. Canada is a breeding ground for racketeering, digital racketeering specifically right now. And I had Marcus Kolga on the podcast, who works from the Donald Laurie Institute, and he really broke this down for me. And he said 10 million is a drop in the bucket. There's about 3 billion that Russia pushes into the United States and Canada to do this, to find side doors because RT was shut down. And I believe Marguerite Simonyan, who is the director of RT, gave a beautiful little interview where she said this is what they were going to do. They were going to, RT was shut down, so they needed to find a side door. So the past several years, they've been looking for side doors. They've been contacting individuals, working with different media outlets through domestic agencies to get in touch with people like Lauren Chen, Liam Donovan, several other outlets, which we are going to unmask and the DOJ is going to unmask as part of that 2,800 person theater of people who have been paid to deliver Russian disinformation about Ukraine, how much they hate democracy, all the stuff. We've been through it. We know what the tags are. And so the interesting part here is that Canada not only allows this, we turned a blind eye to it. We don't have a foreign agent registry. We don't have RICO laws. And so here in Canada, that 10 million was hustled into a company in Quebec. I believe it was called Roaming Millennial, owned by Lauren Chen and her husband, Liam Donovan, both Canadians. Both of those people had direct ties and direct funding through Bitcoin and crypto to the tune of about 9.7 million. They were then asked to set up this company called Tenet Media down in the United States in Tennessee. And they were asked to go and find people, specifically these people, on behalf of those 2 reporters who had found those people, said, I want you to hire these individuals. I want you to hire Betty. I want you to hire Lauren. I want you to hire Dave Rubin, Christensen, Tim Pool,
Pool.
and we're going to pay you, and you do this game, $100,000 an episode or $400,000 a month. Now listen, there is no way they didn't know where that money came from.
No way.
To the point where we confirmed that with Callan on the podcast, and he has firsthand knowledge of the fact that every single one of those people knew that money was coming from.
Of course, they knew where it was coming from. There is no other option. Obviously, it comes from Russia. Then no one else is paying anyone $100,000 to do anything per week on the internet. If it's coming to you on YouTube, it's coming to you, and you're just like a typical influencer like Tim Pool. That money is obviously Russian money, and you're taking it knowingly, and you're basically spouting what you need to spout. I know Tim Pool from way back when. And I can tell you, Tim Pool, I met him during Occupy Wall Street, when he was a roving reporter, activist on Occupy Wall Street. The distance you have to travel to go from Occupy Wall Street to MAGA is quite far. You might say that there's similar on the horseshoe, but there are about one is completely extreme left, one is completely extreme right. And he managed to travel that within a matter of years. And you only get to do that if you're getting paid $100,000 a week by the Russian intelligence services.
Yeah. Oh, no, he completely, he handed in his virtues and values. And you're right. The horseshoe theory of extremism when it comes to communism and fascism, they all come around to the same perspective of, hey, listen, if I'm an extremist and I got no money and I'm just some shitty reporter at Occupy Wall Street, of course, someone comes up to you and says, you got some talent, I'll give you $100,000 a week. You're going to take it.
Yeah. If someone had offered me that money, I would not have taken it, because I know people have offered me money in the past to do all sorts of crazy things. I was invited to go on RT many times. I turned them down. Anyone who's thinking and breathing and living this world knows you don't go on RT, because you just don't go on RT because it's Russian propaganda. And so these people are smart enough to know not to do it, but they just took the money to be traitors to their own country. And that's the bottom line. In another world, in the Cold War, these guys would have been spies. They would have been found guilty of espionage charges, and they would have been thrown away in jail, or whatever happened to spies. Maybe even the death sentence. People used to have that in the world. But today, they're celebrated influencers, and they get to continue what they're doing. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. This is like we've lost our sense of who we are in the world. We don't know. We no longer understand that we have enemies in the world and that they mean us harm.
Yeah, no, we don't. But you know what? The other thing is that, and you're 100% right. When we grew up, the price of treason was death. Right?
Yeah.
If you were found helping another country, giving aid to an enemy. Yeah. I remember being a child hearing these stories of guys that got picked up in the United States for passing secrets to Russia. They got shot. I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when I believe the government of Canada frog marched a whole bunch of people that were working with the Chinese government, put them in jail for life, and sent dozens of diplomats and people out of this country, and were never allowed back. I'm old enough to remember that. This has been going on for decades. This isn't just the last 5-6 years when we're talking about the mood swing in Canada from conservatism to maple MAGA. This isn't just the last 5 years of memes and fake stories from Rebel News. This is a decades-long event that has been going on for so long, and there is so much bullshit in the atmosphere. There are so many people, so many outlets that the DOJ outlined in their paper and that Canada outlined in the NSICOP report, that it's almost impossible to pull on one of those strings at this point and not pull out something that might hurt someone else. To that point, how many people in the government of Canada, because we have this interesting little investigation going on into foreign interference courtesy of the NSICOP. Today,
NSICOP is what? Just tell people what NSICOP is.
It's the Canada's top secret national security parliamentary group. So you have to take this top secret national security clearance. Now, only people that have that top secret clearance that have passed a top secret background check are entitled to that information in Canada. You've got to be a parliamentarian, meaning a senator, someone from the House, et cetera, someone who is sitting in some kind of law position or policy position in government. The interesting part is the Conservative Party of Canada, which is led by Pierre Poilievre, who is in lockstep with those Russian talking points, who absolutely promoted the convoy, which we now know was highly funded and reported on and supported by RT. So the interesting part of that whole mess is that Pierre Poilievre, who's up by 15 to 20 points in the polls, with an election coming away from a year from now, has not and will not and refuses to sit for his national security background check.
That is amazing to me. It is amazing to me that someone like that is not got a top secret clearance. Let's listen to what happened on Parliament Hill.
Why won't the Prime Minister reverse the damage he's done to our borders, secure our country, and stop the terrorism?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Leader of the Opposition was genuinely serious in his concern for national security, he would choose to get the top secret clearance that we have offered him instead of putting forward this little performance. We, on this side of this House, don't play politics with national security.
That is a wonderful thing. Question period, by the way. It's a curious thing. Canadians know a lot about American politics, but American people don't know very much about Canadian politics. But question period happens daily, I believe, when Parliament is in session. And
just went back in session like this week, right? So they had the whole summer off. And
and it's fun. Everyone gets to ask questions of everybody, including the Prime Minister, and they get into it sometimes. Why does he not have top secret clearance? He can claim a lot of things. Like he can claim he doesn't want to be confined by what he can say in public, but that's not really the case.
Well, hold it. That means that he doesn't give a shit about national security. If he claims that he doesn't want to know about Canada's national security concerns because it might prevent him from talking about how much he hates the government. That man wants to be the Prime Minister of this fucking country, Zev.
And that man seems to he has a good reason not to go through a vetting process. And that what could be in his files? He says it's a fantastic spy agency. I'm sure they'll find a lot of interesting things, but he's obviously got something pretty obvious buried. You see these patterns so often. The same kind of media groupings that form around a certain individual. They promote to this individual. They make it into a big name. It's very easy to see that pattern over and over again when you've studied it for a while. And what's basically happening around him is he's being formed into a potential leader, like Donald Trump was formed into that potential leader. They're groomed into it, and then they're presented as the de facto leaders. But he is obviously hiding his connections there to
someone or something or some part of his life. And the interesting part is, so in Canada, you got to get two levels of national security: Privy Council national security clearance, which he had 10 years ago. Keep in mind, he's been an MP for 20 years, has not passed a bill, has been charged with several election crimes and found guilty with election crimes.
Oh, really?
Has done nothing. He's got a $3.5 million pension and has done nothing for 20 years in government. He's just Stephen Harper's buddy, Stephen Harper's friend's kid.
Which there in itself, Stephen Harper, what he's done since leaving office is, he's basically Bibi Netanyahu's best friend. And that's
Netanyahu, Orbán, Putin.
That whole group.
There's one world leader that Vladimir Putin follows on Twitter. Do you know who that is? I do.
Who?
Stephen Harper.
Really? Because he's the head of that organization that helps strongmen become strongmen, whatever it was called.
The IDU. It's called the IDU. And that's the interesting part. And that's a nexus of what connects to why this man does not have his security clearance. It's who he knows. Mm-hmm. It's who he's married to. It's the family he's married into. Aneta Galindo is his wife. And there are more than one hot rumor around Miss Galindo and her family coming from Venezuela, being part of the fundraising arm from FARC. The reason why Pierre Poilievre doesn't, and there are lots of select rumors as to why people think that he doesn't have his national security clearance and refuses to sit for it, and has been chastised, as you saw today, by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of the country, for not sitting for it. If you need to have security clearance like he does, and you have to have a change in circumstances to actually be cleared, meaning the last time he had security clearance, he wasn't married to Miss Galindo. Now, he did get married to Miss Galindo, and he decided several years ago he wasn't going to run for the Conservative leadership because he said he had family conflicts. Now he says it's just because he wants to be able to use our national security for politics and his talking points and his campaigning against Justin Trudeau, which means he wants to be able to gaslight people as to how much fear we have living in this country underneath that Prime Minister. And if you paid real close attention to Pierre Poilievre dusting off his bullshit at the start of that, it was about dismembering people. It was about those people that were dismembering other people being brought into the country on purpose by Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh. So again, we've got fear porn, checks the Russian DOJ box. Then we've got yelling. Then we've got an anti-immigrant slant. And then we've got some anti-Semitic stuff. He really goes the extra mile to endear people to this fear porn and this outrage porn, which works if you're stupid, right? It works if you're an idiot. If you listen to that and you've got the IQ of a hammer and you're from the middle of nowhere in Northern Ontario you're emotionally charged. Then you hear about the fact this guy might be Muslim and you're Christian. Then you're double emotionally charged. You're like, what are these guys doing to our country? And the other thing that he attaches to the end of that, which is fascinating, and I love it every time he does it, is a slogan, right? Which sloganeering when you have nothing, and Pierre Poilievre has nothing, no policies, no nothing. He's exactly like Trump. He's exactly like Trump. He's like the dollar store version of that guy. And he has been created by the IBU and has been created by the people associated and special interests associated with the Conservative Party. And so the fascinating part for me here is I'm talking to you is, oh my God, the more I'm playing this through my head, he's a carbon copy. He's just a little thinner with glasses and apparently has a drinking problem, which makes a lot of sense.
You'd be drinking too if you're facing this conundrum of your entire world falling apart around you because they might be exposed. What a difficult position to be in. And it's true that this is exactly what Stephen Harper is doing around the world these days. The thing is about this movement of strong men, call them what you will, is that they are tiny. This is not a big group of people. They project in a massive way because they've got these massive influencer groups. They've got all these Russian operations around the world. They sound so big and scary and terrifying. They're not that big or scary or terrifying. The numbers are actually quite small. What's sad about it for Canadian politics, because Canadian politics is always so sweet and nice, is that you go from having, polite, dignified conversation to this kind of scene happening outside Parliament Hill just the other day. This is Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader.
Corrupted bastard. Want to say something? What? Want to say something? Say nothing? What does it mean? You got something to say?
I didn't say corrupted bastard, but I said...
Is that what you said?
No, I did not say that.
Who said it?
Somebody behind me said that.
Was it me? Was it you? No. You sure? If it was me, I'd admit it, buddy. Was it you or not? If it was me, I'd admit it. What'd you say then? I didn't say nothing. It wasn't me. It was a gentleman behind me, I guess. Who is it then? Point it out. I have no idea who it was, buddy. My word. You sure it's not you? No. 100%. You're a coward. You're not going to say it to my face. That's what's up. Say what? If I said something like that to you, I'd admit it. All right.
Now, no one seems to know that Jagmeet Singh is kind of like a very fit guy who has got incredible martial arts skills, going after the guy and saying anything.
Black belt in jiu-jitsu, Zev. He whoops some ass, that guy. He can,
These guys, I don't know where they were busted from, but they get thrown into Parliament Hill. They get to do these stunts. They get to destabilize people. And this reminds me a lot of the early MAGA movement, where you've got these people who seem harmless, but they're so shocking to the system that people pay attention to them. And suddenly, out of these one gets success, and then suddenly next week there's 10, and then there's 30, and then there's 40 people out there all acting like wingnuts. And it creates an environment where that is what you're focused on. And that is what the world becomes for you. Canada wants to hold on to being a decent place, but it certainly does not want a prime minister who's going to have ties to Venezuela or any other dictatorship. I mean, it doesn't want to be talking. You don't want someone there talking Russian talking points. You want someone who's going to take things seriously. Yet it seems to be that no matter what Canadians try, it's happening. It's still happening in the country.
Yeah, it's not only still happening, it's organized, right? These are not like what we saw there with Jagmeet Singh, what you saw during the convoy here a couple of Februaries ago. These are not pop-up protests. These are not people just taking matters into their own hands. I would say 10% of these experiences where some redneck or some hillbilly like Waylon Shirk shows up with a camera and assaults or insults somebody, whether it's a politician, whether it's a leader in the community, whether it's people protesting for LGBTQ rights, that a lot today too. Those people are encouraged and organized by certain third-party agencies in this country, which is the other thing. In America, you got super PACs. In Canada, you've got these things called third-party agencies, and there are a lot of them. And the majority of these third-party agencies are used to skirt election spending rules, skirt the rules around decency in politics. And their goal is to data capture, get as many emails as they can, and to send people emails, make them part of this club to think that they're fighting for democracy by sending people to Parliament Hill or to someone's house to harass them. It is the same. It's Maple MAGA 101, dude. It's exactly how they do it. And these third-party agencies not only have these mailing lists, they've got sheriffs and generals and people that they send to coordinate different events, different protests against Justin Trudeau, show up to a kid's school to protest a trans book reading. And it happens on the left. And that's the interesting part, is that we're not just talking about hillbillies on the right that have been captured by foreign misinformation, disinformation, foreign funding into these third-party agencies and groups that are there to literally show chaos and make Canada look like shit on an international stage, which is exactly what the convoy was.
Yeah.
These people are legitimately told that they're, in certain cases, you're doing this for the Lord. You're doing this for Allah. He wants your kid not to be taught gender studies. And they're gonna mutilate your child at school. It's another message that gets sent around. Trump was doing that at a rally the other day where he's, you know what they do? You send your kid to school as a boy, he comes back as a girl. They're doing like secret sex changes. And the people here literally believe that. There are people there.
Of course.
Dude, there are stupid people in every country. There are core belief people who are literally too stupid to use critical thinking and common sense and go, wait a second.
I love the truth that you mentioned that it's coming from the left too, because the truth of it is they attack both sides and they do it really well. And I can absolutely prove that there are people on the left wing of American so-called podcast influencer circles. A lot of those same people are also paid by Russia, are also paid by them to keep the left flank up. And they don't care which side they land up tweaking. And if they need to, they'll tweak whichever side they want, as long as you don't talk about Russia. And that is the thing that people forget, is that it's not just the obvious people on the right, but it's not just the influencers you think of. There are people on the left who are also paid by Russia to ignore certain topics, but also amplify certain topics.
Yeah, the through line or the funnel through that, if I can, just for a second, Zev, is you look at a guy like Mario Narwhal or Aaron Mate, and they present themselves as right fighters, right? And the right fighting left, that's what they present themselves. But they're so extreme, they end up putting out tweets on behalf of Russia that talk about a wider war in Ukraine is bad for everybody. Ukraine needs to give up. Let Russia have their stuff. When you see, that's when that person or that brand has been captured by foreign interference. Two people like Aaron Mate, two people, and it could be left, it could be right, but they've got all those bases covered. And they say, listen, this is your job this week. You got to do it. Callan Robertson, who's on our podcast, former Rebel News employee, now works for Byline Television. He's in Ukraine, told a story of how Tenet literally got talking points from these two Russian people that you just had on your screen that got charged by the DOJ a couple of weeks ago when it came to what was going on in Ukraine. And they had to, it was the invasion of Kursk. It was when Ukraine went into Kursk. And they were like, this is how you're going to approach this story. That's right. Elena and Kostya. This is how you're going to approach this story, to the point where the people at Tenet were literally getting their talking points for their podcasts and their videos from Russia. So when someone says, listen, I don't know that, I didn't know they have emails from those people saying you're going to address what's going on in Kursk this way.
They were in Slack groups together. Of course, they knew they were Russian. That's what do you think you were talking to?
Telegram, Slack. Yeah.
They're not only looking for people who they can cultivate, they're looking for people who are alone, and then they create communities around that. They surround you with people that are your friends, and they really make it easier for you to become part of this group, because everybody wants to belong to a group. And once you're part of that group, they have complete control over what you say, how you say it.
Yeah, and the pressure will come from friends, DMs that you get from people. You and I probably have lived a very similar existence over the past several years.
Yeah.
Case in point, I put out a video today that featured this gentleman who used to work at Rebel News. He outed Tommy Robinson, Milo Yiannopoulos. He's got pictures of them being recruited in the RT offices in London.
Oh, wow.
And, so I tweeted yesterday. I'm like, hey, listen, we've got this big podcast coming. It's going to be a lot of fun. I had 3 friends from my former media life that are very conservative say, hey, listen, I don't know if you want to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why not? The media ecosystem in this country is a small world. You might not work again. I got that one. And I'm like, I work for myself. I'm not looking for a gig. And so you might piss off these guys because and then the last one I got was like, hey, listen, I do some work with XYZ. Could you just take it easy, or you let me know, or send me the file? And I'm like, you can go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
You have to build a vault around yourself. You have to build this protective layer, still be in the world, still be out of the world in this industry. And here's the other thing. You can't be desperate. You can't be alone. And the fact that you brought that up, and I'm really glad you did. I had a conversation with some of the law enforcement here in this country 2 years ago, and they told me that at least 70 to 80% of independent and traditional media outlets in this country take money from foreign countries to torque stories for favor. 70 to 80%. And there's a reason you're not seeing any of this Russian disinformation bullshit in mainstream media in this country. There's a reason people like us do massive numbers, like enormous numbers. We did 1.5 million views on the DOJ story.
I've worked at all these networks. I know exactly what's it like in there if you try to push a story that they don't want to put up there.
And it doesn't matter what party it is. So by and large, every single one of these institutions in this country, this mainstream media, we don't take any government money at all. Not 1 cent. We haven't applied for a grant. We don't take money. We're not looking for bailout. We kill something. We eat something. That's what we do here. And we work really hard to do it. But that is not the case with 70 to 80% of news outlets in this country, because those news outlets in this country, A, are compromised by the money they take from the Canadian government, and B, compromised by the money they take from other countries through domestic agencies that have fancy names that say, hey, we've got this story. Would you mind placing this? Hey, and dude, the mainstream media and media is desperate for cash. Again, going back to that desperation.
And the same in the United States, you've got the 5 big networks. They're all controlled by the same Russian money that flows around everywhere else. This is how Russia has been brilliantly, to their credit, been able to achieve such success in their attack on democracy. It's all been done through the media, and it's been really successful. It's happening in Canada now. And I worked at the CBC as well. And the amount of conservative, think tanky people that show up on those shows, which no longer do journalism now. They just do punditry, right? We don't actually report the news. We just have people on here who'll talk about the news. And each of those people is so compromised. They're all from these think tanks. They're all funded by the same people who fund Donald Trump, basically. It's the same crowd.
The CBC being what it is one of those companies that is so overly concerned all the time with what people think that they will not do great news or information based on the idea that someone might complain. Yeah. Someone might sue them, and one of their partners of a board member, because you know how this works, working at CBS, working for different media companies, that if you say the wrong thing, you do a great job, you do some brave journalism, you do some great original content that upsets the wrong person, one person, and 2 million people consume that, and 2 million people don't have a problem with it, but one guy has a problem with it, and that one guy happens to be an investor in Bell, be on the board at Rogers, be involved with someone's wife at CBC.
We think of them as a very quiet, sort of non-important presence because they don't do anything, yet they have enormous presence in terms of their political sway and in terms of their influence. And it's about to get worse. It's not going in the right direction. It's going in the wrong direction. More of the wrong money, more of the wrong influence groups, more of the organized corruption that we hate to see in these kinds of places just growing, more of the foreign influence. And you're not going to hear a single story about Russian interference in Canadian politics on the CBC.
No, and the interesting thing about the CBC too, Zev, and you know this, is that the government of the day decides who's on the board.
Yeah.
Who will decide the direction of that media outlet, right? So in this case, it's liberals. For 7 to 9 years before that, it was conservatives, and they dust everybody. It's literally the arm of, it's a national broadcaster. There are good people that work there. It's probably the most unbiased, but to your point, it is crumbling under the weight of suspicion.
CBC is the one thing you could sort of rely on in this country as being somewhat objective in some of its reporting. If the conservatives get into power, it'll be all gone. I mean, we're talking about a wholesale takeover of the big Crown Corporation and turning it into a mouthpiece of the state, as strongmen do in strongmen countries. If you get Pierre becomes prime minister and they follow the same strongman tendencies that we've seen everywhere else, guess what Orbán did in Hungary? He took over the media. He made sure the media was compliant. What did Erdogan do in Turkey? He took over the media and they made sure the media was compliant. It's going to be exactly the same thing here. And because we have such a powerful CBC, we have such a huge organization there, that thing is going to be a very loud mouthpiece for the strongman who controls Canada. And it's going to be very hard for people to control.
Take Post Media, for example. They are not the voice of a country. They're a private company. They own the National Post, the entire Sun group of properties, newspapers. Saltwire just bought all the newspapers, defunct newspapers out in the East. They own the majority of publishing out West in Canada now. And that company is owned 66% by a company in the United States out of New Jersey called Chatham Asset Management.
I broke that story.
Chatham, and they're the keepers of Trump's secrets. That's who they are. They're the David Pecker Group, if I'm not mistaken. He's involved there as well. You've got like the MAGA news-funded hedge fund mouthpiece funding 66% of everything that happens at the Post Media or National Post Media Group, the biggest newspaper in the country. Back when Stephen Harper, back to him, Mr. IDU, back when Stephen Harper was in power, he knew what he was doing. Canada had these regulations where you couldn't have foreign ownership in print, right? They were laws. You couldn't do it. He literally went back to the mat, changed all the laws, and within a matter of seconds, Chatham Asset Management swooped in and bought the National Post from Conrad Black. You know who Conrad Black is?
Oh, I know Conrad Black.
Yeah. And who is one of the masterpieces of the patriarchal colonial conservative movement in this country. He is the number one asshole when it comes to misinformation, torquing stories for his friends.
And so he wrote a nice book about Donald Trump to get out of trouble. And then, of course, Conrad Black and Rebel Media, they go back a certain way.
You want to play guilty by association for a second? So Conrad Black absolutely associated with funding Rebel Media.
Yeah.
One of the other founders of Rebel Media, a gentleman named Gavin McInnes. Sure.
Oh, I know Gavin McInnes. He's the Proud Boys guy.
Yeah, started the Proud Boys, which is a designated terror entity in this country at the moment. Another gentleman that started that, Ezra Levant, who you know is currently underneath it at the moment. Another gentleman who helped start that, Brian Lilly from the Toronto Star, who's widely regarded, who lives with Doug Ford's press secretary.
Big money has already been sold out. There are people waiting for their check at every major public utility and public organization in Canada. They're standing by, waiting for the strong men to arrive and hand them the check that they're waiting for. They've all sold out so long ago. That's already set up. The infrastructure is already set up. All they've got to do is get one guy to be the prime minister, and then the money will flow. They know that. They know that Donald Trump's a creep, but they still want to get him elected, because for Donald Trump to get elected, that's the only way the money starts to flow from Russia and from all these other heavy hitters around the world. That's how the money starts to flow to these already bankrupted individuals. I've got to wrap up, but I am really loved talking to you, Dean. Tell me everyone about Crier Media, because it has become quite a force, and I want everyone to pay attention to it. Explain exactly what Crier Media does.
We're just this little media company that has several dozen podcasts. We're a media company. We're an amplification hub. We're community builders. We've got a web design company. We've got a social media company. We do a whole bunch of brand building for podcasts and businesses. We manage social media sites. We're a collective of really responsible reporters, journalists, lawyers. Kareem Assad, who's one of my favorites. So I work with her every day. She covers protests from a very unbiased perspective, where she just documents what people are doing. And we try to make sense of what's going on. We feel like we truly have responsibility to the people in this country to be of good character, do acts for the common good, and to help other people, to stand up for our country, stand up for the marginalized. So that's what Crier Media is.
We're so lucky to live in worlds where we have freedom, and to just watch people squander it away like it's nothing.
People like Pierre Poilievre, Donald Trump, people like Ezra Levant, the agitators, the assholes, no one's going to remember them as a decent individual who did something for human beings, who decided that they were going to live outside of themselves for the greater good. Nobody is going to say that about them.
I have no doubt that at the end of the day, the people will prevail. And these idiots who are out there just in it for the money, they are not going to be able to defeat the will of the people. They're just not going.
Not sustainable. Lies and being an asshole, not sustainable. Being kind, being truthful, being honest, always sustainable.
Exactly.
Always.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narativ, where truth lives.